this is going to be a very quick video of the top books that I read in 2023. So I have read 127 books this year. I think that's right, 127 books this year, and I have read quite a variety of books. So I've read some classics, I've read some fantasy, which isn't a genre that I usually go for, some like YA novels, and then your kind of like, you know, classical contemporary sort of stuff. But I thought I would go through, I have some of them here. So these are the ones that I have physical copies of, but there were a few that I read, there were quite a lot that I read on Kindle, so I will just kind of chat through those. And I want this to be really, really quick, so just a few lines about what I liked about each one, and if I would, obviously, like, these are all books that I recommend, so why I would recommend it, who I would recommend it to. So I'm going to start off with the Christmassy ones, just because, like, Christmas was last week. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This is something that I read essentially every single year as of the last couple of years. If you haven't read this, I really, really recommend it. It's a very, very short work. I think it's about 100-ish pages, and it tells the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, who is this really, really grumpy old man in around the time when Dickens was writing, so like Victorian-ish English, around 1800s. And he's just absolutely miserable, hates Christmas, and he's visited by a couple of ghosts. They kind of walk him through the past, the present, and the future, and what his life looks like. They kind of like teach him lessons, you know, via past, present, and future. I really, really recommend this. I think it's such a classic. I also went to see this at the Old Vic, so I went to see the production at the Old Vic in London, and that is such a special production. I went last year as well with Ellen, and we went this year as well. We're trying to make it into a tradition, but it's such a beautiful piece of theatre, and I don't think there are any changes throughout the years. It's essentially the same, but it's such an amazing production. So if you can get down to London to see A Christmas Carol around Christmas time, I highly recommend, at the Old Vic Theatre. So the second two novels are kind of contemporary work, and it's the Christmas Book Club. This is her newest, Sarah Morgan is the author, this is her newest novel. And I also read The Christmas Sisters, and I really love Sarah Morgan's writing style. She has a couple of lead characters, and the narrative shifts from each character. So with the Christmas Sisters, it's the three sisters and then the mother, and narrative shifts between the three sisters and the mother. So you really feel like you know all the characters and can get inside their heads, and it just feels a lot more intimate that way. So I highly recommend this. She is one of these authors that I really struggle to put down her books. I've read quite a few of hers now. I think I've read like 6 or 7 of her books over the last 2-ish years, and I really, really recommend her. I recommended this to my mum, and she read the book within 2-3 days. The Christmas Book Club is a story about 3 friends who meet every single year, and they have been friends since university. They meet every single year to discuss a book, and that's kind of their excuse for getting together, because they live like across the United States. And the fourth kind of character in this, or like the fourth kind of main character in this, is the owner of the little inn that they go to do their book clubs. They go to a hotel or an inn every single time to kind of get away from family, get away from their regular life, and just fully relax. So the inn owner is the fourth character. They are somehow, their stories overlap, but I'm not going to say any more, but highly recommend this. I thought it was excellent. Let's do the classics. So Frankenstein, this is my copy. It's absolutely beautiful. I think I read Frankenstein when I was a teenager, and then I hadn't ever picked it up after that. Is that right? Yeah, like I haven't read Frankenstein in probably about a decade, maybe more. So I decided to pick this up at around, I think it was like around Halloween time, and I thought it was absolutely excellent. Like, you know, there's a reason why this book is so highly talked about. Frankenstein starts off with a couple of letters before it gets into the main story of Frankenstein. And I think what a lot of people don't know, people who haven't read it, is that Frankenstein is not the monster, it's the person that has created the monster. This, I think, is a really, really great read. I also think it's a lot more accessible than some of the other classics. Like, it isn't difficult to read, or I didn't find it difficult to read. I highly recommend this one, especially around like Halloween time, because, you know, all the vibes. My next classic is one that I have read many, many, many times, and this is like my nice copy of it. I have a really battered copy of it, and it's Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and this is one of my favorite classics. I've read it so many times. The movie is one of my favorite movies, both the older version and the newer version. But this is such a great book. It's the story of 4 sisters, and they are 4 very, very different sisters. I really, really resonate with Jo. So 4 sisters, Jo, Meg, Amy, and Beth. And I grew up really, really resonating with Jo. Growing up being a little bit weird, and, you know, I was very much into writing. I was always reading. I always had a book with me. Jo kind of made me feel like it was okay to be a little bit odd, and not kind of like the norm, a little bit more stubborn. And yeah, I think she made me feel like it was okay to be a little bit different. So I highly recommend this. Again, it's not a difficult read at all. It's a book that's quite easy. It's quite long, but it's quite easy to get through. The writing isn't difficult. The language that is used is not difficult. Yeah, it's such a beautiful book, so highly recommend. Next one is Lie With Me by Philippe Besson. I think that's how you say his name. It's a translated work. So it was originally written in French, it was translated into English. So this tells a story about an affair between 2 young boys in rural France in the 1980s. It's very, very short, but it is beautifully written. I don't think I have seen anything else by this author, but I would happily read anything that he wrote. I thought his writing was stunning. The language that was used to convey the difficult emotions that were being experienced in the story are just really, really beautiful. So I really, really enjoyed this one. I don't think I've read anything like this, and as you can see, I kind of heavily annotated this book, which for me is an indication that I really enjoyed it. When I engage with text more, like make notes, annotate, highlight, etc., I just feel like I get so much more out of it, and I just really enjoy that experience. So yeah, highly recommend this one. Okay, the next one is a book that has been so widely talked about this year specifically, and rightfully so. It is A Little Life. I was lucky enough to see this live in the West End when it was in London, and I also saw it in the cinema when it came out in London as well. And I genuinely think this is one of the most incredible pieces of literature I've ever read, and it is definitely the best thing that I have ever seen on stage, and probably will ever see on stage. It is incredible. If you are going to, it's a really hefty book, if you are going to read this, I strongly recommend that you look up the trigger warnings before doing so, because it does deal with very, very difficult subject matter. So highly recommend doing that first if you are going to pick it up. This was really hard to get through. I think it took me a month and a half to get through it, which for me is quite long, given that I feel like that's the wrong word, but that I loved the book so much. I just had to keep putting it down because it was really, really challenging at times to read. Again, simply because the subject matter that is being dealt with predominantly in this book is so abhorrent. But there are also some incredible moments of hope, of love, of friendship, of family. So yeah, I just think this is an incredible book. Again, very difficult to get through. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, but yeah, it was really fantastic. Very different book, fantasy. So this is part of the Akatar series. If you have Instagram, TikTok, then you will have seen this. This is the final book right now. There is another one coming, I don't know when, but this is the last one that is out, A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. Again, it's quite a hefty book, and I read this in 5 days. Now, the reason that I'm putting it in my like top books or book recommendations is because I could not put it down, and I think that for me says a lot. Like, if I can't put down a book, then I feel like I have to include it, because yeah, like I don't come across that very often. Now, I will say the disappointment was predominantly my fault, because I thought that this was the last book in the series. So I think my not being able to put it down was largely due to that, because I kept thinking, oh my gosh, like, we're gonna hit, you know, a massive battle, or we're gonna hit the climax in the story. And that climax in this story was really, really anticlimactic, because I thought it was gonna be something huge, and it wasn't, again, because this is not the final installment in the series. But it was a great story. I think the character development of Nesta in this story is really, really intriguing and kept me wanting to like continue reading. But you know, is it one of my favorite books? No. I did really struggle to put it down, again, which is why I've included it. There were a couple on my Kindle which I will very quickly mention. So Foster by Claire Keegan. I would read Claire Keegan's shopping list. I think she is a phenomenal writer. I have read everything that she has published, every book that she's published. I know she's done some short stories which I have not read. I've read every book that she's published except for Antarctica, which I have on my bookshelf and I am dying to read. So Claire Keegan, highly recommend her. I also read a fantastic book called A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, and this is YA fantasy. It's a very, very short book, and it tells the story of this young boy who is really struggling with his mum's terminal diagnosis, and he is visited every night, not every night, he's visited at night a couple of times by this monster that takes him through these stories and tries to help the boy learn lessons via these stories, to have certain realizations about his mother's diagnosis and kind of what life looks like in the future, etc. So really, really lovely book. Haley recommended that one to me and it was fantastic. I think I read it in like a day. There was another book that I read on my Kindle called Friends Like These by Meg Rossoff, and this book was recommended to me by, I think it was someone somewhere on the internet was like, if you like Sally Rooney, read that book. And I do agree, it was very Sally Rooney-esque, and I really, really did enjoy reading it. And I think Sally Rooney is one of my favorite authors. Friends, Conversations with Friends and Normal People are two of my favorite books. I just think they are out of this world. I could reread them over and over and over again and not get tired. And I have struggled to find an author with a similar writing style that has evoked all the emotions that I go through when I read Sally Rooney's work. And this, for me, was as close as I have ever gotten. Not to say that she's like Sally Rooney, because Sally Rooney is unique, but close to it in terms of the writing style, similar-ish themes, you know, depicting young people growing up and trying to figure out what the hell they're meant to be doing as an adult, and just navigating sex, relationships, work, trauma. So yeah, highly, highly recommend that book. And then the last one that I'll talk about is Small Worlds by Caleb Azuma Nelson. This is his second publication, and I read his first book, I think last year, called Open Water. My goodness, what a fantastic book. So when this came out, I was so excited to get my hands on this, and I think this is a signed copy. Signed copy from the lovely Daunt Books in Marylebone. But this is such a great book. It did not disappoint. I'm always a little bit hesitant once I've read a book from an author that I just think is so phenomenal. When they come out with their second novel, I'm always a little bit hesitant because I'm like, oh, is this going to be as good as the first one? Probably not. This was fantastic. The book is going through the journey of this young man and trying to find himself while still trying to maintain those ties with his family that don't necessarily understand, you know, why he's making certain choices, and then in tandem trying to figure out how to stay connected to people in his life that he grew up with, like his, you know, really, really good friends who are exploring different avenues in their own lives, and those kind of paths might not be the same. So trying to kind of figure out how to go about doing all of that. So such a good book. And again, like his writing style, his language is so poetic, and I found myself underlining a hell of a lot in this book just because it is so beautiful. Like, I am very, very excited to see what he brings out next, because his work is just extraordinary. So really, really recommend this for everyone. And that's it. Those are all of my kind of top choices. There were so many books there in my Goodreads, so if you want to see more of what I read and kind of what ratings I gave those books, then you can check out my Goodreads. I also have Storygraph as well, and I like Storygraphs because you can give like the star increment is on a 0.25 scale, so you can give like 3.25, 3.5, 3.75, versus Goodreads only lets you rank in full stars, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which makes it really difficult. So I feel like my Storygraph is a bit more accurate in terms of my rating, but there we go. So I hope you have a wonderful New Year's. I'm really, really excited for 2024. My goal for 2024 in terms of reading, and I want to say this to hold myself accountable, is to read more challenging literature and just take my time and enjoy it. I think we can get so caught up in, I've read 150 books, I've read 200 books, and kind of like the almost like gamification of that, and like the dopamine of like, oh, I've read like X many books, I'm in the top however many percent. Like Goodreads sent me an email saying that I was in the top 20%, I think, of readers, and that, you know, some serious dopamine there. But the next coming year, I really want to challenge myself more with the literature that I choose to read and just take my time. So lower my book goal. I think I've set it to 60 instead of 120, so I've slashed it in half. So anyways, if you have a book goal, let me know. I hope you have a wonderful year, and I'm really looking forward to 2024. Thank you so much if you stayed to the end, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.